Just page down.
So it's 5 minutes for just an intro to Rumi or to myself. Great. Well, hi. I hope everyone is sufficiently on a sugar high after those cookies. My name is Tariq Fancy. I founded Rumi, or the Rumi Initiative as we call it. And I'm going to try to give you a really quick context of what we do so it makes the discussion later a bit more sort of relevant and fruitful. So look, our simple idea is that we're a nonprofit, and our challenge is best exemplified in this story. This is Saba. She's a refugee in a Syrian refugee camp on the border of Turkey and Syria. And like a few million kids in that region, refugee children, she lacks access to a good education because of everything that's going on in the region and the lack of infrastructure. And that represents the risk of a lost generation of kids who, for now years, are in these refugee camps. It'll be obviously very difficult to rebuild the country when you have a whole generation of kids who haven't received an education. And this, more broadly, extends to around 1 billion kids around the world who don't get access to a great education. And we started some years ago because we realized that a problem this big could not be solved by traditional methods, which were kind of like, let's raise more money, right? So if you have a really big problem, you need $100, you only have $1. Pretty clear, you raise $99 more. And if you're going to innovate, it's really innovation around like fundraising and marketing. We wanted to innovate in the whole model. We saw the potential to do that by leveraging two really good, important technology trends. The first is that pretty much anything that any of us have learned in the age of 18 is now available for free online, right? I mean, most people here probably remember when encyclopedias were $1,000. And textbooks, and you can go to YouTube and learn whatever you want. So the challenge of curating and organizing that content, right? Because it's got an infinite amount of stuff, but it's all out there. And secondly, the cost to deliver that's plummeting. Hardware costs, bandwidth, even storage space to work offline. And so we began with the simple idea of, can we put those trends together and take even a low-cost tablet or smartphone and literally load the thing with an entire curriculum of free learning content and literally turn the dollar we have into $100. And if you think about it, people take it for granted, but this device can store like hundreds of CDs or like probably thousands of cassette tapes or books or whatever. And so we started off with that idea and started pushing it along, and now in just really 4-ish years, we're in over 20 countries, from programs for girls' education in Africa to ones for refugees in the Middle East, all using local partners. So UNICEF uses our technology in the Middle East. Junior Achievement uses it in Africa, and Right to Play uses it. And the idea was that we could empower these organizations doing education on the ground with a simple, flexible technology solution. And on a simple device today, like a low-cost tablet that's under $100, in our first project, someone found that the content on it used to cost $5,000 to $10,000 to produce in paper format, right? All works offline. So you think about it's kind of like taking the dollar you have and making it 100 times worth that in value. And what's really interesting about our work is that when you look at all the places we've already rapidly expanded around the world, it's across cultures, across ages, across geographies. And one of the biggest challenges we faced early on was that there's just too much content online, and we didn't know what to use and what not to use. And the biggest demand we were getting was actually for practical job skills content. And so we went through an incubator called Y Combinator. It's a really well-known incubator in Silicon Valley that produced Airbnb, Dropbox. They just started taking nonprofits. They were using technology to innovate solutions. And so we went through their program, and we came up with an idea, which is that there's all these companies who had employees that were really skilled, that were passionate and wanted to help, and we needed help in organizing content for job skills. So we produced a platform called the Learn Cloud, and the idea was that we could kind of match the two things up and let thousands of people around the world contribute by giving, for the first time ever, their skills and energy and passion rather than just money, right? Because the traditional model is UNHCR website, nice story, scroll down, insert your visa. We were saying, why don't we get people to donate their brains? And so we announced it at a conference there, and thousands of people around the world met the call. And it allowed us to get into these programs with UNICEF and other partners infinitely faster, infinitely better, and at very low cost, which is exactly what you need to address a problem at that scale. And I would point out that a lot of companies that are already involved in this, or Loyalty One a few weeks ago did more projects. A lot of it now is around transformative leadership training. So not just are we running a hackathon where people are contributing their skills online, that then impact these remote communities, which, by the way, there are people in the Arctic Circle literally using their computers to impact refugees in the Middle East. but also we can get employees then to take the mantle and start to train their colleagues to do this and run their own sessions, which is, we think, an amazing way to start to push leadership in advancing change, especially for social matters. So a lot of companies involved, and the Deloitte one, for example, I mean, they actually self-organized it. Right? It wasn't that we went to the head of Canada or something. They just found it and were really excited about it. Obviously, you can tell they look sort of younger, very, very tech-savvy, but this is something that excites them. So I will wrap up my, I think, roughly 5-minute intro with a quick look at kind of how we see the cycle of purpose. This is stuff we've done with Google for their month of service, where we were basically taking volunteer energy on the left, and on the right, the programs we're doing around the world that, again, work primarily offline, although they connect every few months and can update. And, you know, the idea was to channel the volunteer energy into impactful content. Then afterwards, you know, really get data back on what works and what doesn't work, and keep building a cycle that, you know, uses data to improve the product and improve the impact on the ground using the energy of people on both ends of it. So that's sort of the introduction to, whoops, wrong one. That's the introduction to our work. Thanks.
Thanks. Please go sit. We're going to pepper you with questions in a few minutes. Do you mind? Yeah, there we go.
Hi, everyone. I'm Angela. Welcome to our offices. I actually work on this floor, so it's kind of neat having you all here. So I'm here to tell you a little bit about an emerging role that's coming to life in a lot of companies in Canada, and I happen to have one of them. And it's basically how can companies use our expertise, our assets to drive social good, but to also drive economic benefit back to the company. And I think that's really what we're all talking about, whether it's economic benefit in brand halo, or it's attraction of and retention of talent, or if it's actually incremental revenue streams. These are the ways that our social change programs, I think, are going to evolve. Now, in my case, I've actually been here, I'm going to age myself, I've been here for 21 years. I've rotated through multiple different parts of the business, usually anything to do with partnership building. So whether it's building the rewards portfolio, which I did for 8 years, or working on the new business side, which is bringing in new sponsors, did that for a long time. On the side, I'm really interested in social goods, just what I'm about. And so I wanted to bring my full self to work. So I came up with some kind of crazy ideas. And guess what? My CEO said, sure, in your spare time, you can do that. So I did. So I had a bunch of volunteers who were also interested, and we went out and we signed some transit companies, and we thought we could get more people to take transit if we gave them air miles. So that worked. So anyway, suddenly I was given the opportunity to create, along with my co-founder, Air Miles for Social Change, and we actually created a social venture within the company. And anyway, that program was probably 7 years old, and we have been able to drive good behavior around energy conservation, eating healthy, getting people to buy more healthy food for their kids and take transit. There's a whole bunch of things. We had about 50 clients. And that program has evolved into actually my role today, where my boss said, you know what, we need to make this an official role in the company. And so now I got to come up with the name. I thought it was pretty good. So Head of Social Change Strategy and Innovation. But my role is to come up with more programs like that. So Air Miles for Social Change drives millions of dollars in revenue to the company every year, but it does social good. Last year, after spending a year doing design thinking, which I was excited to hear about it this morning, because really I can't say enough about that process, I was tasked with coming up with another social enterprise idea for the business. After a year of discovery, I created and launched the Good Food Machine for the company. And this is the Good Food Machine, just in synopsis. Basically, it's a program that is attacking both food security and healthy food education for mostly low-income kids across Canada. And we are teaching kids how to grow food, cook food in school. And we are currently, it's only 1 year old, but we're already in 23 schools in 3 provinces, and we're in Nunavut, working in areas where food security issues range in 1 in 6 children up to 7 in 10 are going hungry at least 1 day a week. So these are the communities we're working in, and I'm happy to say it's going really well. So these programs, I think Loyalty One is going to continue to do more and more of these types of things. So far we've just had 2, and I see more and more companies starting to say, yes, we want to connect our social change activities to our corporate strategy, to the things that matter to our employees in ways that they can use their skills, their work skills, to actually drive this change. So that's kind of why I'm here, is to talk about, I call myself a social entrepreneur, which is driving change inside the company, which is actually really hard. But everything's hard. Every one of you have a hard job. So I'm happy to answer any questions about the fair share of change management that I have gone through in bringing in these programs.
Okay, so Sarah, come on up. That was perfect. Yep. There you go.
All righty. Thank you. I don't have any visuals, but I'm hoping through the journey that I'm just going to talk you through for the next few minutes, you can sort of, think about your own organization, whether a corporate or nonprofit, and kind of take some takeaways from some of the principles. So Deloitte, for those of you who don't know, is a professional services firm, and I oversee all of our corporate responsibility across Canada and Chile. A very weird combination, but we're starting to combine firms, and so Chile has come into our portfolio. And Deloitte globally has always had what we called Impact Day. And when I joined the firm at the beginning of this year, really a big part of our sort of employee volunteering, if you will, was our Impact Day, one big day of community service where we rallied all our people out into the community. And when I came in to actually observe what was going on with this program, there was a bit of a reality check for us. First of all, things were going very well. We, or had been for a very long time. So we had up to about 85% participation on our Impact Day, which for an organization of 10,000 people plus, that's fairly significant. And we know from data that that's very, very good. However, at the same time, we were having a lot of issues. So the first one is, candidly, it was having very limited impact, right? So all of our people putting on their T-shirts, going out into the community and picking up garbage and planting trees and painting fences is awesome for some organizations, but for us at Deloitte, a very, very skilled workforce, it actually had limited impact. Secondly, we were hearing from nonprofits that it was a significant burden on them. We had nonprofits say to us, our walls in our offices are actually getting smaller, or our rooms are getting smaller because our walls are painted so much, because every corporate wants to come in and have a community day and paint our walls. We had experiences where our teams would go out into a park and clean the park, but the park was clean because PwC was there the day before cleaning the park. So there were a lot of issues. As well, for anyone who's ever planned a day of service, you would know that the resources and time that goes into planning that is unbelievable. And when we actually pulled what we call a WIP report, the time report, on both our practitioners out in the community on that one day and all of the time that it took to plan that day, it was over $50 million worth of market value time. And as a professional services firm, that is hyper-focused on time-bound, we count our time insanely in a professional services firm. That was a bit of a reality check for us. So what do you do, right? Employee volunteering is still really important. We came from a culture, again, that was very time-bound. We knew we were giving our people a certain amount of days out in the community to volunteer. We wanted to support them to do that. So we've shifted significantly. Sarah? Yep.
We need you.
Okay.
Corey needs to pick your brain.
Okay. I won't tell you what I'm going to do. Okay. I won't tell you the answer. I will, but not yet. Okay. So I'll stop there, and you can figure out what we've done.
This is what it's been like for 2 days, Sarah. This is what it's been like for 2 days, so you don't have to worry about it. I want to get into, try and connect the barriers that you all just said while you're standing up, specifically to someone who may have gone through it. So, Tarek, we heard over here that there is this kind of reputation or perception of the nonprofit sector that is probably not true or as uniform as statements usually are from the corporate sector. So you operate a distinctly different kind of nonprofit. You're housed in Ryerson in the DMZ zone where, all these tech firms are. You were down in Silicon Valley. It's a little bit different. But I'm curious how you approach working with corporations from a point of view of a nonprofit so that perception or that issue is just not even discussed, or it's kind of off the table. I'm just curious if you have any thoughts for others who may be going through that.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say kind of two things. I mean, first, I think that in general, I think nonprofits should try to focus more on actual innovation. And I don't mean even companies, nonprofits, innovation as a word is like really popular. Everyone says it. No one really knows exactly what it means. But I do think that technology is impacting every single business. I mean, it's not no longer a sector that sits amongst itself. If you're doing hotels, you're doing taxis, you're doing finance, logistics, every single industry is being impacted by technology. I don't see why nonprofits don't see it the same way and try to find ways to use technology to make themselves more effective. And they are, but I think they could be a lot more aggressive about it. And I think, to be honest, sometimes it's the funding sources that are a lot more risk averse that pull that back. But I would say that the most important thing is just to be creative about looking at, our technology is built from the ground up to not just to build technology for the sake of it, but to provide value, right? So we don't look, when we give someone a device, it's not a tablet. It's a library for the cost of a book, where we can basically take an entire curriculum and make it cost what a textbook costs. And we're not trying to build hardware. We'll just get the cheapest, most durable hardware. We're not trying to build flashy content. That would be insane. You can find everything for free and online anyway. And so I remember sitting on a panel in Silicon Valley, and people said, why don't you connect to a satellite and do all this stuff? And I said, listen, we're not trying to be Steve Jobs. We're trying to be MacGyver, right? And that's what works. I mean, that's what really grows in these markets. So when we started talking to corporates, and they said, well, listen, we have employees, and they're really passionate, and they want to find a way to help. I think it's incumbent on nonprofits not to look at that as being like a tax, like, oh, we got to check this box off because they want it, so find something for them to do, this wall needs painting. Is actually think creatively, because if the DNA of the organization is truly creative and resourceful, you're going to look at that like we did, where we said, wait a second, some of the most skilled employees in the world, they get paid like a lot to do what they do every single day, and they're going to come as like a free labor source. And we're doing programs of junior achievement in Africa on financial literacy. Like, I almost feel it as being criminal not to find a way to take and turn that into some kind of value. And so we start thinking creatively, there's got to be a way to use this where, we don't take like the director of finance and, someone in marketing and have them, picking up garbage in a park. We're thinking to themselves, like, they have highly valued skills in this economy. We have to connect that in a way that actually drives value. And we started to learn when we did it, it was actually more meaningful for the volunteers also, because frankly, all of us, we have skill sets that we value about ourselves, that we bring to the world and that we do every single day. We get, we make a living doing those things. And it's much more meaningful to use those actual skills and that passion than to just sort of be told to do something that's a bit random that probably doesn't, we kind of know that it's not what we're really good at, but, we're just trying to help in any way we can. And we started making that connection. We started finding that it, most importantly, drove value downstream for people who really needed it in a very cost-effective way. And then it turned out that that was actually transformative for the people upstream, or who were giving their skills, because it turns out that they could see, like, they're, especially technology-savvy younger folks, not stupid, right? Like, they're going to look at it and they want to see the kind of innovation, creative thinking that, is on their phone, right, with the apps they use every day. And if they start seeing that and they start seeing that something really makes sense and is cool and they're contributing, they get really excited about it. And so that's kind of how we approached it.
So there's a nice match between the kind of cool, innovative, creative thinking and the cool, innovative thinking that is maybe there from younger people at different companies. So with you, Angela, the mismatch between CSR and regular business. So you come from the other side of the business, the dark side of the business, and you had to go through this period of probably a number of years to convince people that, no, we should be doing this also as part of our business. So a lot of people here are probably in that same situation where they have a community investment portfolio, they're probably very good at it, but still can't get through to the business objective side of it. So if you could tell everyone like 2 things that they could do, or that you did, that maybe they can apply.
Sure. So the number one thing is to get that senior level buy-in. You need a champion and a sponsor who has your back, who believes in you, and you actually don't need more than 1 or 2. Most people are going to say, I don't know what she's doing, I don't understand it, I'd like her budget. I heard that a lot. But you just need a couple of senior people that really get it. And it, as Tarek said, it really is, we're just talking about a different form of innovation here. This is driving innovation in your company, whether it's big I or little I. How do you do that? And whether it's a CSR initiative or social change or something completely different, it's all the same. You have to have a vision. You have to be so ridiculously married to your idea. The passion you have for it is probably the number one piece, and that's how you'll get that senior level buy-in. Influencing internally is a very difficult thing to do, and a lot of us, I know, don't feel like we have a lot of strong influencing skills. And somebody recommended a book to me a few years ago, so I'll just throw it out to you. If whoever's heard of John C. Maxwell, he writes very digestible books. They're small, they're perfect for airports. It's called How to Influence People. It's just really great. And when you're thinking about how to get that idea across and get that sponsor, read that book.
Awesome, thank you. Well, now the big reveal, Sarah.
I know you've all been waiting for it.
So for you, this issue of internal systems almost preventing, or the internal resources you have coming up against providing, a most impactful service that Deloitte can do in the community. So how, if you've done it already, how did you do it, or how are you orienting your portfolio away from that impact day type of thing to something different?
Yeah, so we are right in the heat of it. So what we've basically done is shifted, and we've really started to look at what is it that our people do every day, and what is natural from a human-centered design perspective, what is natural to them, and how do we embed social impact into their work. And so we've started to establish what we call society partnerships. So we've established a national theme for our corporate responsibility moving forward, and we're empowering each business unit, region, service, however we split them up, to find their own organization that they themselves are going to rally around. And in a client service business, we actually have encouraged them to think about those nonprofits as clients, right? So you have an account team, you have a lead client service partner, and within that account team, you've got someone who's hyper-focused on scoping and scaling pro bono work, right? So we have a certain budget associated to real skills-based, pro bono work. There's someone on the account team who is hyper-focused on volunteering, so meaningful ways that we engage directly with that organization. There's also someone who's looking at it from a relationship management perspective, right? In the same way that we engage with our clients, getting our people to think about what nonprofit they would want. And so we've been engaging with the business. We've been encouraging them to reach out. Some of them have gone through employee votes to decide what their nonprofit organization is going to be. And I think we've seen a couple of things. One, we've moved from Impact Day to what we call Impact Every Day, where when there's an ongoing relationship that business service line has with a direct nonprofit, they're connected to them every day, and they're thinking about them every day. And that is such a more meaningful experience for the nonprofit and for our own people because they feel connected to it. We've seen that the impact that we can have is so much greater when we can actually apply our own sort of, skills and leverage and expertise to that organization. And again, from an impact perspective, knowing that it's happening on an ongoing basis. As well, a key part of it was encouraging our people to think about a spectrum of ways to engage. So with our Impact Day, it was always something that you could do on a one-day basis. And things like mentoring and career coaching are limited when they're limited to one day. And so providing that spectrum of ways for people to engage, whether it's they're doing, their real client work for the nonprofit, so they're applying their, digital expertise to help rebuild the nonprofit's website, or maybe it's that they want to coach and mentor the beneficiaries of the organization. Maybe it's that they want to take a leadership role and they actually want to get onto the board of that local nonprofit, right? So providing a spectrum of ways where our people can insert themselves. I think we knew that there was a spectrum of skills and a spectrum of interests. We know that not everyone in the business wants to spend, every evening from 6 to 9 with that organization. They want to sort of come in and out. Some people do, some people don't. Some people want to know that Deloitte's doing great things but don't necessarily want to directly engage. So this has sort of been a journey that we've actually put the onus onto our client teams, and it's been part of performance management and other things.
Great. So if you think of the barriers that when we were standing up and we listed these, there's 3 very clear solutions to some of these, and they could be applied to not just the ones we circle, but Sarah talked about mimicking your business process to engage people to get out there? Everyone at Deloitte is used to already how these client teams work. Could you use that to your advantage to actually create more impact? Angela talked about the role that influence plays and getting better at influencing and communicating your influence internally to slowly nudge the company in a different direction. And then Tarek talked about innovation. Everyone's doing innovation in some way, but if you walked into an executive's office and said, what we're doing is innovative and let me tell you why, that could help as well. So you've all answered the first question well, so thank you for that. I'm going to go into one more question and then we can open it up. We didn't really intend for this to happen, but the three of you all come from a business-oriented background. Certainly, Sarah, your superstar business history, and Angela, you were in business development. Tarek, you were in finance on Wall Street. And I'm curious, how do you see that your perspective on what you're trying to do from a business background is helping to really push the agenda that you're trying to do? And has it helped you or has it hindered you in that sense? Maybe we'll start with you.
Sure. Well, it's helped me a lot because you have to always have this clear strategy about why you're doing what you're doing. And a lot of the things that come up in social responsibility programs are very emotional. It's in the old days, people said, oh, we're doing this because it's the right thing to do. It makes me feel good and this and that, and that's great. But that will never get our giving into the next echelon, which is connecting it more to the corporate strategy, unlocking more funds, getting more resources, having more sustainable impact, which is where we want to go. So it's got to be very clearly articulated about the value back to the organization. And I don't mean to sound so clinical about it, but that's just how some decision makers think. So you can't go to them with the emotional aspect. It's got to be, this is going to acquire this many new millennials to the company. This is going to retain this many people. It's really important to have the why clearly thought out.
Yeah, I think I heard a quote once that basically said in the context of sort of social impact programs, if you can articulate the business case, you're too late. And what I mean by that is the business case is hard. It's very hard to actually say this is going to retain this many employees. It's really hard work. So the sort of strategy that I took when I came to Deloitte, knowing that we were a time-centered organization, was actually pulling out what were we currently allocating towards this? What was our current sort of investment? And not just what we publicly said of, 40,000 hours and this and that, but actually the time that went behind all our people volunteering, right, to get that impact day up and running. And use that to sort of say, okay, we're going to take that and actually reallocate it. So we weren't asking for any additional funds. We were just reallocating existing. And you can get very creative about the way that you pull those sort of existing hours. So that was sort of the way that we thought about it.
And so I would say, my business background probably helped in sort of two ways. One is how we operate, and the second is how we engage companies. And how we operate, I think it's just, so I was an investment banker in Silicon Valley is how I started my career. So I was in the group that led the IPOs of Amazon, Cisco, Google. And people would always ask me my favorite business model was, and I'd tell them, actually, it was a nonprofit, and it was Wikipedia. Because I was there around the time it was starting, and I'd never seen anything so fascinating. I thought it was magical, the idea of using nonprofit status as an actual intrinsic competitive advantage. And everyone said, well, how can they compete with Britannica, which is like 100-plus years old, or Encarta? And they built a movement of people. And they couldn't have done it as a for-profit, right? No one was going to work for free so Jimmy Wales could IPO it and buy a yacht. They were doing it because they cared about the mission. And they lowered the cost of encyclopedia from $1,000 to, frankly, if all of us gave $1, they'd have more than their cost covered. We don't, which is why they keep asking us. But it was fascinating, and so that motivated a lot of how I looked at it. And I thought to myself, well, we have all these skills, and people they want to contribute, and then we have this need. And what if we're a nonprofit, and we can show them that their work is going to translate into impact? That's exciting. But I think the second thing was having worked inside in the private sector. I always look at it from the other person's point of view, which is not, hey, here's what I want. That's important, but it's also what are the incentives of the other side. And then how do we find something that is a win-win? And so we always looked at it as saying, well, what are companies looking for, and where's this beautiful marriage where we can create value for both sides. And it seemed like a lot of the companies we work with right now, they want to back social causes, but they like innovation because it gets the workforce really excited, particularly younger, tech-savvy ones. It connects them to the innovation lifelines around sort of everything they're doing, and that really worked well for us. And we found that, particularly for senior management, they loved it, because they could sort of see where the world was going, and this aligned the company and the values around that, and they could get involved early, as well as doing the corporate, so the volunteerism, engaging their workforce. And I think like a couple of years ago, we got approached by Harvard Business School to write one of those case studies they write, those 30-page things. And so one of the reasons we were so excited to have them do it was that we thought that a lot of what we've done has transferable skills, right? Transferable things that other organizations can do. We wanted to see this getting taught at business schools so that more nonprofits start to adapt that kind of ethos and incorporate these kinds of ideas into their entire model.
So I want to throw it out to the crowd, and it sounds like you're open to marriage proposals now, or I'm not sure, and maybe all of you. Anybody have any thoughts, questions? Again, this is your opportunity where you've got people who are pushing through some of these barriers. Some of them you may be experiencing yourself. We'll start over here. Who's got the blue? Oh, it's way over there. Here, I'll bring.
Just a quick question. Looking 10, 20 years down the road, how do each of you see businesses evolving to the point where there are no more nonprofit organizations? In other words, the innovations that you're talking about have become so integrated into businesses that there just is, this is the way to do business.
I've actually thought a lot about that. And in my experience, it's not going to happen because business, we come up, let's say for my example is a Good Food Machine or Air Miles for Social Change, we came up with these great ideas and we used our assets to promote. We have good marketing channels and we know how to run a business and we know how to create incentives to change behavior. All that's great, but we couldn't have done it without the YMCA, or we couldn't have done it without Heart and Stroke. We couldn't have done it. So it's actually a really critical symbiotic partnership. And that's what excites me about the future is truly creating partnerships that work, where, I will say it is a lot of work. I mean, I've worked with school boards. I'll tell you, that's the hardest thing. It's harder than corporate and not-for-profit and government school boards. But I work across sectors all the time, and it is possible. It does work, and that's what we're going to get to, is where companies are accelerating and amplifying the work of the not-for-profits and helping them. Like we went into YMCA with our database experts here, and we spent 2 days in there, and probably maybe I'm bragging too much, but I think we improved their access of their data mining, their insight capabilities by 50%. And that was just basic stuff that our guys here do every day. So I see that kind of value exchange happening more and more, but it's just going to take more effort on both parties to come up with the ideas.
So I would say I think that business will do a lot more for social good in the future. I do think nonprofits will continue to exist and have to exist in certain sectors. And I would look at it this way. The UBS, the investment bank, put out a report, I think it was in January, saying that to hit the UN Sustainable Development Goals, you need a few $1 trillion being invested every year, just because of the scale of what is trying to be done globally. I think it was, then they said that the top 10 foundations in the U.S. in aggregate are under $100 billion. The Gates Foundation is like 40-something billion or whatever. So there's clearly a massive gap. And I think that gap will be filled by two things. One is that, there's under 100 billion top 10 foundations. On the other hand, there's $8 trillion of private wealth. And it's looking for ways to drive social good. People are looking at, hey, how can I invest in Tesla rather than ExxonMobil or next Tesla rather than next fossil fuel company and other things. So I think the idea of impact investing is actually going to start to explode in the next 5 years as products start getting created and the big firms on Wall Street actually start to take it seriously. And I think that we're on the verge of that. That's one piece of it, and I think it'll drive businesses doing a lot more. So I think probably most of it will be that. I still think nonprofits will continue to exist because there's certain areas where I think you can't have a profit motive, whether it's first responders or certain parts of education. Like certain parts of the education sector can be replaced by high-quality for-profits, but there's always going to be some things for which you only want to have a single bottom line because the two will be in conflict. And I think for those, nonprofits will fill the void. But I think together they can kind of, there's a big gap, and they're going to have to work together on filling it.
Angela, you and I have talked about this a lot in our friendship over the years about making the business case. And Sarah, you talked a little bit about business cases being difficult. And I kind of wanted to share with everybody, Stephanie knows this, wherever Chris is, he knows it. Arundel knows it, Neil knows it. When I was at Manulife, I actually proved, I took employees that volunteered and those that didn't, and I did a 3-year study and proved that employees engaged in volunteering stayed with the company 3 times longer. And my SVP of HR actually pushed me to make it better and prove that the employees that were getting time off to volunteer weren't going on a boondoggle. So we proved that they met or exceeded on their performance reviews. And I noticed that Manulife, I don't know if anybody's here from Manulife, but I noticed that Manulife recently just did a study to talk about what the costs were of replacing an employee, and it was something like $60,000. So I think, you know, that's how we were able to make the business case for time off for volunteering, because we did show that, you know, if you give Sarah a day off to go and volunteer for Habitat for Humanity, not only does she stay with the company 3 times longer, but she actually meets and exceeds on her performance review. She recommends the company as a great place to work. She tells her friends it's a great place to work. And she feels really happy as an ambassador of the company to say, hey, here's a great place to work that actually also helps me do things that I'm passionate about.
So I totally agree. I think, I guess my point is that it takes time to actually prove the business case. You've got to have the program up and running, have the metrics in place, and have 2 or 3 years of longitudinal data to be able to prove that there has been retention of employees, for example. I think there's a lens with which we look at all decisions, and it's 3 sort of cases. There's a social case, as in, are we having meaningful social impact? There's a talent case, in, are we providing meaningful leadership development opportunities for our people? Is this a meaningful way to engage them? And then there's the business case. Is this a meaningful relationship? Is this pro bono opportunity an opportunity for us to, as a business, provide a qual for a marketplace client experience that we haven't delivered yet? Is there relationships with the nonprofit that we can? So we look at those 3 things from a business case perspective of the social, the talent, and then the sort of marketplace business piece.
I'm just going to jump in there. I just want to caution, because I'm just going to challenge that just a tiny bit, because I do have experience, and I believe that you can have small wins. You don't have to prove the full business case. It sounds a little intimidating. And I go back to the design thinking model, which is about test. And it's a micro test. Just test it. It's not perfect. Get out there and test it and measure, and then learn from that and tweak it. Now go out and test again. And so those are small micro business cases that are building. And over time, it will get you more momentum. So I just don't want people to feel like, oh my gosh, I have all these really lofty goals, and if I don't hit them, I'm not even going to try. That's why I love the design thinking model, because it's really different.
It's very hard to be taken seriously talking into a blue box, but I'm going to try. So I would say that, when you said they're all open to marriage, all 3 of them touched the ring finger. I just want to point that out to you inadvertently. Sarah, a couple of quick questions. One is, we've been talking a lot about co-creation. So as Deloitte went through this process, was there an opportunity to co-create with the nonprofits in any way? And then I have a question for Tarek.
So absolutely. We went through a series in our very consulting way of, and we actually engaged our own sort of consultants from Monitor Deloitte to help us, of really real chats with the nonprofits that we'd been engaged with. And that's where we started to hear that Impact Day wasn't as impactful as we thought. And so this society partnership model was actually sort of came from them, saying this is how it would be meaningful for us. And to be honest, though, I would say that, finding nonprofits from a corporate perspective and vice versa for a nonprofit is like dating. You kind of have to test the water. Do we like each other? Do we see eye to eye? Do I like how you make me feel? Vice versa. Like, there is a bit of dating there, and so not all nonprofit fits this model, and we know that, right? So not all nonprofits will fit the society partnership model. Not all nonprofits, can meaningfully value from our pro bono. We know that a lot of smaller nonprofits, for us to come in as consultants and, sort of tell them how to do things, which is their perspective, it's not meaningful for them, and they can't actually absorb that pro bono. So there are a whole host of other things that we're doing other than society partnerships that do engage with those smaller organizations. But absolutely, co-creation was a huge, huge part of this process. Yep.
To your design point, right, around rapid prototyping, that kind of thing. And so, Tarek, you mentioned innovation, which is a world that I live in as well, but it's way more than technological, right? I mean, so for example, we talked here about the LGBTQI2S, did I do it, movement, and how that really, it started in corporations, and then diversity is now being absorbed it started in nonprofits, and now it's being absorbed by corporates. Of course, we get the business case around diversity, right? But that stuff had to start in community. I'm most excited about multi-sectoral engagement and the opportunity for not just corporate community, but sort of government engagement, academic engagement. I'm wondering, in your world, if you're seeing anything around that, anything that's really exciting you around those cross-sectoral collaborations to get to new levels of impact.
Yes, somewhat. I think it does take time, though. I think that the biggest challenge when you have cross-sectoral engagement is that it can slow things down, and I think the true drive for innovation is always experimentation and piloting, right? If you look at the lean startup model, it's all about building what's called a minimum viable product, or an MVP, and that's what we did. We had a pilot in Haiti. We just took a bunch of content, put it on a device, and tried it out. And I think that the challenge is you wait for all that engagement. We talked to academics, and I had done grad school in economics, written papers. The problem is they wanted us to have answers we couldn't possibly have answers to. They said, well, I wrote a paper on ICT and post-colonial African villages. That's fine, but there's no paper you can write that's going to tell you how a kid's going to use a device. The only way to do that is experiment. And I think in any of these cases, you have to just try things out. And I'd say, in my experience, the most innovative companies will encourage lots and lots of experimentation. I mean, there's a reason that Google gives whatever it's 20% time. They probably change it over time, but they want their employees to be creative and try things out. And I think government has a role to play, but it's a lot later in the innovation cycle. Like, we went to the government now Global Affairs Canada is a supporter of ours and all. On day one, I walked in and I said, listen, here's what we want to do. And they said, they're like, we love innovation. And they said, do you have 5 years of audited financials? Or another one I loved was, do you have a long-term impact study? And I said, well, there's no such thing as like innovation that comes with a long-term impact study attached. Otherwise, it wouldn't be innovative anymore. Right? So I think the challenge, I absolutely agree, you need that cross-sectional, you need all these pieces, but my only thing would be you have to phase them in piece by piece. And I think the first kernel probably starts with a small team, 1 or 2 or 3 people, and that grows. And there's a lot of diverse groups of creative people who start to build it, and then it grows from there.
Yeah, of course.
Do one here and then one there, and we'll end with question, and I want to.
Got it. I only have to remember one row, I think. Okay. My name is Lindsay. I'm with the Taproot Foundation. So we really focus on pro bono. So I'm thrilled to hear what each of you is doing or taking advantage of. So my question actually is more directly for you. I'm thrilled to hear that there's a chance to revision and reallocate the way resources go towards a day of service. Obviously, Deloitte's not unique in having a day of service, but I do think the feedback is very common from organizations that it tends to take more than it gives. So I'm curious, often we found that the primary motivation for companies who really go all in on the days of service, even when they find out the impact isn't there, is because of an assumption that the PR opportunity is more meaningful with a critical mass. So you obviously made the economic case. How did you make that case successfully? And is it just Deloitte Canada or everywhere that's now facing that out? In Chile, yes, you're right.
So great question. There's a couple things that I can sort of dig into there. The first one is, and something that we often hear when we think about days of service, is it's also about sort of the engagement and the team building of our people. And my response is our days of service shouldn't be focused on our teams. It should be focused on what we're doing in the community. And a lot of our metrics that came out, so the conversation started, a lot of the metrics that came out about Impact Day, and I hate to be downing Impact Day because I think there is a lot of meaningful stuff that happens across Deloitte. However, it was always, Deloitte's had 40,000 hours of community service, and we've had a participation rate of 85%, and we've done this and we've done that. It was very internally focused. We talked nothing about what we'd actually done. And so that was the way that we sort of started to go to senior execs saying, this isn't right. From a PR perspective, honestly, as much as you can get the big photo with the T-shirts and the whatnot, it's not really a news story. Everybody's doing it. And we try and avoid at Deloitte the sort of self-promotion of that type of thing. So our PR team is very focused on, okay, let's take a story of impact a year down the road after the partnership's already sort of been in place. So we never really pushed that. So we didn't get much pushback on the PR because I think people saw through the fact that it wasn't real, meaningful PR.
Wes, and then we're going to wrap up.
So my question relates to B Corps. So as a kind of small organization, I get contacted by various folks saying, do you want to be a B Corp? Hey, why aren't you a B Corp? Come on, man, be a B Corp. And given that, we've got service, we've got medium to large size company, we've got Innovation Hub, although I know you hate the word innovation. I was just wondering if you guys can comment on whether, in your honest opinion, you believe there are some genuine benefits either internally from a process standpoint or from a reputation standpoint of being a B Corp, or is it something you've considered? Are there alternatives to doing things, given that the idea, as I understand around B Corp, is to talk about it in the context of, B Corp certainly focuses on talking about the contribution you make to the community as an employer, et cetera. I guess most people know about it already, but if you guys could comment on that, that'd be great.
It's relevant for you. Did you think about B Corp?
Well, so we're a nonprofit. Now that was one important piece of that was that, we, like a Wikipedia, we wanted to be able to engage a movement of people behind it and not have them ever wonder about our profit motives. And having been founded by like a former banker and kind of Wall Street guy, I don't want there to be any confusion about sort of my motives for doing it. So I think the question you're asking is in general, or the B Corp status, should companies pursue that? To be honest, I don't have a strong view on that. I mean, clearly, for those of you who don't know, and I'm not an expert myself, I think being a B Corp, basically you have to fulfill certain requirements, and they examine them every so often, the certification that you're generally kind of a socially responsible company. Now, for a variety of reasons, I think a lot of companies can't do it or don't do it, or certainly for the people in this room, the decision to be a B Corp or not probably sits outside of your domain. And I don't think that companies need necessarily to be a B Corp to be socially responsible, right? I can think a lot of companies do great things, and they don't pay the money and go through the process of being a B Corp. And again, it may just be that it's a new status that they don't understand or think about, or it costs money, or it's, so I think it can be a nice way to signal that a company has in their ethos that they're socially responsible. But if I think of the future to the other question of companies filling the void of fulfilling social issues because of the massive gap, I think 99% of them probably wouldn't necessarily be a B Corp, even if they are in effect fulfilling a lot of the requirements.
Yeah, and an interesting tidbit, what we're seeing from our audit practice in Deloitte is some of the most socially responsible companies across Canada, the US, and otherwise are actually starting to consider audit from a corporate responsibility perspective. So when we look at sustainability reports, I mean, we audit financial reports all the time. Why don't we audit sustainability reports? And so we actually are seeing a bit of a shift almost towards that sort of B Corp notion without having to have B Corp status to do that.
Right.
Sure, go ahead, Al.
So I brought B Corps to Canada, so I think I'll just talk this through one second. So it's about 140 B Corps in Canada right now. So we've always been about 10% of the global B Corps. It's a movement, and so part of why people signed on was that there was a fear of greenwashing. They couldn't really prove it, so you have to actually change your articles of incorporations to say that you'll consider more than shareholder interest, you in fact consider stakeholder interest. So in terms of funding, the actual process is free. So you can go through the accreditation process and see what you think. If you decide you want to go for it, then there is a fee. But the actual, impact on workers, impact on environment, all of that kind of stuff. And Canadian B Corps tend to score pretty high because we do have legislation around, say, mat leave and pat leave and those kind of things. So it is something at least I would encourage you to look at from doing the assessment. If it feels right to you, you want to be part of that growing movement, I'm happy to chat with you more about that.
Okay, so we're going to end off. I'm going to ask you three this question. I'm going to put Stephanie and Chris on the spot, too, and ask them the same question. So we want to end it in an inspiring way. We've been here for 2 days. People are feeling a bit sluggish, but we have the weekend right around the corner. So what is the one inspiring thing that you want to leave this group with? 140 characters. Let's kind of make it that simple. What's one thing you want to leave this group with so they walk out that door and they may remember the last thing they heard? So who wants to?
Yeah. I actually had prepared a whole bunch of slides that we just pulled at the last minute, but we're going to share them with you later, so you don't worry about having to write all this down. But basically, number one, before you leave today, write down what your commitment is of what you took away from this conference, what you're going to do when you go back. And I mean it. And then find somebody in this room who you can tell your commitment to, and they'll tell you theirs, and hold each other to account. Follow up with each other and support each other, okay? Now, I'm just going to tell you Angela's 6 Ps, because I've figured out the code, okay? This is what you guys need. You ready? So number 1, passion. Take it back. Don't lose it over the weekend. Number 2, pace. So you've got to push, and keep the momentum, because your regular job catches up really quickly, and then you get distracted, and it never happens. Number 3 is push, which is what I talked about earlier about influence. So you're constantly pushing your project forward. Number 4 is perseverance, because lots of things will go wrong, and you'll think, this is more work than it's worth. And by now you don't remember all of these amazing like-minded people in this room, and you're around naysayers, and then so just forget that. Keep going. And on my number 5. Number 5 is people. You can't do it by yourself. So that senior level buy-in I talked about, and getting some volunteers, some people in your organization who want to help you out. And number 6 is pluck. I needed a word that started with P. It means courage, because you have to have courage to believe in your idea, and you just have to go. So never, ever, ever give up.
Yeah. I think she covered it for all of us. I'm going to pull out your 5th P people. Find your champions. Find those people in the business that believe in what you're doing. Senior execs, yes. But also a lot of the junior staff. Create a movement. Find your champions.
And I would say my final is like heavy load here. I think, I'm going to leave a sort of like Elon Musk style sort of grand view of the world, but I honestly think that corporate volunteerism in general, and the donation and the civic duty and sense of donating to people is going to translate. It's going to switch from being purely monetary into the next few years to being something where people can donate skills and their brain and their passion in a way that, in the past you're geographically limited because you're doing it physically. But when 6 billion people are going to have smartphones by the year 2020, that's powerful. Whether it's tutoring people, helping them in other ways, giving them advice, how to get a job. I mean, all these things will move from being geographically limited to something that you can use technology to do across vast expanses. As I mentioned, a lot of the work we're doing is impacting refugees in the Middle East. The glass is half full on that. I think it's extraordinarily exciting. And as corporate volunteerism moves digital, where volunteerism and donating skills goes digital, it's going to unleash a tremendous amount of power as people fulfill civic duty in different ways than they were limited to in the past.